So it's incredibly tempting to continuously override the save method as I have. Now, this is generally okay. You can definitely do this and make a very functional application in the long run, but I would actually recommend against it. I would recommend using something called signals, which is what we'll do in just a moment. And there's a big reason for this, and that's because we don't want to repeat ourselves over and over again. I actually want to reuse these options in other places. So what I'm going to do then is cut this out of here, paste it up here, and now make reference to it. But instead of calling it video state options, I'm going to call this publish state options, and I'll set that equal there. Okay, so I probably actually want to set this in a different location at some point, but for now I'm going to leave it in just right there, right at the very top of this model's class. So let's go ahead and actually run python manage.py test videos to just ensure that everything is being tested correctly and it's still working. Thus, another reason to have test options. Now, absolutely, I could reuse or change how I name this, but the nice thing about how it is right now is my actual options are still related to the model. However, they are inherited from a different class. They are using a different class. So if I ever wanted to add another option on here, that option can be used on all of the places that I end up using the option class for publishing. So this also means that in my save method, well, this seems to be a little bit of a challenge because now I'm going to be copying and pasting this everywhere with both of these things. Well, of course not. We definitely do not want to have this paste everywhere. So we want to have it in only certain places. So this is when using signals comes in very, very handy. So we'll go ahead and do from django.db.models.signals. We're going to import the pre-save signal. You might be wondering why the pre-save signal. Well, if we look at our method of video itself, we have a save method in here. Notice that all of this is happening prior to the original save being called. If I did it after, this would be called a post-save method. Both actually can work, but the post-save, you might accidentally call self.save and run into some errors, and it'll be incredibly bad. It will just keep on trying to save itself over and over and over again, which is actually another problem that I think a lot of people have with this save method is they try to actually call self.save. So let's go ahead and see how this pre-save method or this pre-save signal works. So a couple things. First of all, I'm going to define my publish state pre-save receiver function. And this is going to take in a sender and instance, and then it's going to be args and keyword args. Okay. So the actual publish state itself, we want to actually use what is it about this publish state that I'm trying to do here. Well, it's quite literally what we did with the publish state related things right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Yep, go ahead, make that cut and paste in here. Okay, so now we are using video state options here. Well, we actually no longer need to do that. We can now use the publish state options in here. And this is almost the same, except for all of the self references. Now, the self references is obviously the instance itself. It's from the actual object. So hopefully you're well aware of that being the case. With the publish state options, I no longer have to reference that as self. I can just reference the actual choice field itself, which is way up there. And then we can come in here and just set the instance everywhere it needs to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say is publish, and I'll put this in here just so it's a little bit easier to read. And there we go. And then is draft is equal to this call. Okay, oops, that should be a T. There we go. There we go. There is our new signal for our receiver function for actually handling the exact same thing that we did before. So this time I'm going to go ahead and do presave.connect, and we want to connect to this receiver function with a sender being the actual video itself. Okay, so this attempts to do the exact same thing that was originally in this save method, but now it's actually a lot more reusable. So let's go ahead and run python manage.py, make migrations, python manage.py migrate, because we made changes to models, and then finally python manage.py test. And what do you know? The tests still work. They are still almost identical to what we've seen, but now we actually don't need video state options inside of this video at all. I just left that as reference, and we'll just go ahead and use publish state options instead. And then inside of the different calls that we might have, which we don't have just yet, but inside of tests, we definitely use the video state options. So now I'm going to just use publish. So I'll bring those in, publish state options, and no longer video dot, but just publish state dot, and so on. So these two methods are about reusability. Now, if you don't need to reuse the state of publishing, then you won't have to do what I just did. But if you end up reusing it like I'm going to, then you're going to want to make sure that you are doing it correctly. Okay, it looks like I have an error on line 19. And no, 19 of models.py, because in models.py, we did a model manager right there. Okay, and let's run that again. And sure enough, there we go. Okay, cool. So far so good. And yet another reason to have test case is because I made a major change to how we ran our state, but all of those tests came back positive. So we're now running in the right direction. But of course, we haven't finished our signals yet because of this one right here. So now what I'm going to do is create another receiver function called slugify pre-save. And yet again, I'm going to use sender, instance, args, and keyword args. And then in here, well, we actually want to grab the title itself. So title being instance.title, slug being instance.slug. And of course, we're going to go ahead and say if slug is none, we're going to go ahead and do instance.slug equals to slugify of title. And yet again, we're going to run presave.connect and slugify pre-save, and sender being the video. Save that, and we'll run the test again. And we got instance is not defined. Oops, I spelled it incorrectly. And tests are okay. So again, going back into our test, this means that our slugify field is tested and working correctly. Obviously, all of our publish fields are also working correctly. Both things are great. Okay, so now you're like, well, that's nice. It seems like I actually ended up with a lot more code than I did prior. Well, of course it does, because we actually haven't reused these things at all. And perhaps we will again in the future, but I know that in general with my application, I'm probably going to have another place somewhere with the publish test, and I'm probably going to have it somewhere with slugify. So that means then in my main configuration folder, I'm going to actually move both the actual choice options over there as well as the signal receiver functions. So inside of Django Flix, I'm going to go ahead and add a DB directory or a module for Python, do init.py, and then do models.py. And now we're going to go ahead and import a number of things. So those right there. And then our receivers, I'm actually going to bring over into being another model called receivers. So let's go ahead and go back in here. And we'll call this receivers. Okay, so copy this whole thing, bring it in here, and only keep the receiver functions and all of the relevant code, not connecting the signals at all. And we'll scroll up. There we go. So we still need publish state options, which is coming from .models import publish state options, because again, we're inside of this DB here. We've got the slugify, we've got time zone. I think we'll need time zone for sure. And we no longer need the pre-save, and I probably don't even need models. I do not. Okay, Very good. So now back into models, I should only have probably just the model itself. That's it, or the actual text field itself. There we go. So now back into models.py, we are now going to finally import all of those things. So from Django Flix.db.models, we're going to import the published state options model, and then from Django Flix.db.receivers, we're going to import those actual signals themselves. So publish pre-save, and then slugify pre-save. Okay, and now I can get rid of all of those other classes, leaving the presave.connect. And there we go. And now I can get rid of the save method here. Ooh, we actually didn't test it correctly because I actually still had that save method in there. So this actually might yield results that we don't expect. But of course, it does yield the correct results. And then in my tests, I definitely want to get the publish state options from the source, not from the import from the model itself. So from Django Flix.db.models, we're going to import the publish state options. Okay, so now our code is tested. It's a little bit more resilient to what it was. And granted, it might seem a little bit more complex because now I can't actually see what those published state options are in here. But if you're using this a lot, then you would easily be able to see it. And another huge thing is we could probably add a bunch of these fields into a base model class that we can inherit from. But that's getting probably a little too abstract than we need to do right now.